I don't know why I always wait till last minute to do everything, like, ugh. But this is the finished dress. Obsessed. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another tutorial. I have decided to give myself the impossible task of attempting to make a dress in 24 hours. Why? It is hubby's birthday tomorrow, and I found the most beautiful floral chiffon silk fabric, and I actually want to try and make a dress. We have a reservation at this really fancy restaurant for tomorrow evening, so I hope I can get it done. I just have the fabric, so I need to make the sewing patterns. I need to cut and stitch the dress. I would not be staying up overnight, but I'll try and work a little bit longer than I typically would to see if I can get it done. So if you like to watch me struggle and watch this dress come to life, it will be a tutorial, so I'll try and keep in all the important bits of the pattern, the sewing, so you can actually recreate it for yourself. But basically, I really hope I can get it done. I really want to wear this dress tomorrow, and fingers crossed it works. I don't know why I always wait till last minute to do everything, like, ugh. To create the sewing patterns, these are the measurements I worked with, and I always recommend working with yours for the best outcome. The materials I'm going to use to make this dress are laid out here. This is 2.5 meters or yards of this really soft chiffony fill fabric in the most gorgeous yellow, purple, and sort of like white print. I also got lining, 2 meters of that, and a matching invisible zip to go on the side. And to make the straps adjustable, I have 2 pairs of these strap adjusters. I have a separate tutorial where I shared how to make an adjustable strap, so if you want to find out how that works, please check that out. I'm going to link it down below. So I'm just going in here to cut out a big piece of paper so I can plan the front of the dress. This is an asymmetric dress, so I actually have to plan out the full front and the full back, not like the halves I normally would do. Starting from the top end, I'm drawing in a short horizontal line like so. This is going to help me plan my neckline, and I'm marking 3 inches below that is going to become my bust line, and I'm marking the vertical distance from my bust to my waist and vertical distance from my waist to my hip. And once I have those points marked in place, we're going to square them across using my set square and pattern master. All tools I'm going to use are going to be in the video description as well if you want to grab some for yourself. I find using a marker pen just makes it more visible for you guys to see. If I was doing this for myself, I'll most likely use pencil with the eraser. Once I have those points marked in place, I'm going along my bust line and marking 1/4 of my bust measurement plus 1/2 inch ease. And then along the neckline, I'm marking 1/2 of my across chest measurement. Mine is about 14 inches and 1/2 of that is 7. And then I'm going to my waistline next. I'm marking 1/4 of my waist measurement plus 1.5 inches to accommodate my waist dart and some ease in there as well. And I'm just marking away the 1 inch dart halfway through my waistline, and I'm drawing a vertical line that cuts through the middle of that dart. And before connecting the dart points together, I'm going along my hip line and marking 1/4 of my hip measurement plus 1/2 inch ease. Now my dart is 1 inch below my bust line and about 1.5 inches above my hip, because I don't want the dart to eat into my bust measurement or my hip measurements. Hence the reason why for where it kind of like stops at the bottom and where it goes to on top. Now I'm drawing in the rest of the dart on the waist before going in to connect all the points on the side to create the side seam of my front dress. The neckline on the front is 1 inch below the bust line, and then I'm going to this chest line and I'm marking the middle point, and I'm going to draw in a V-shaped neckline that goes from that center front point I marked up to the chest line. Then I'm going to draw in the side or arm curve that goes like so from where the bust line is and goes back up to the point, so we have a neckline that looks like this. My desired dress length at this point was 27 inches. I went ahead to add an additional 10 inches later on because I wanted the dress to be more midi than mini. With that marked in place, I'm going in here to draw in the dress hemline, and along that point I'm going to be marking 1/4 of my hem measurement. Mine was 37 inches. That divided by 4, I marked along the hemline and I'm connecting it back to the hip line. After I was done marking all of the points I needed, I'm just going in here to add the seam allowance around the neckline, the arm curve, the side seam, and the hemline as well. So we have a basic front plan that I can go back in and make any changes, especially for a bust dart and then the hemline, because the hemline is more curved. Now for the bust dart, I'm drawing in a line that goes through the side like so and connects back to the bust point, and I'm marking 0.75 inch on both sides, and that I'm going to connect back to the bust point. I have found that when I do styles like this, if I don't add a dart around this point, there's going to be some gaping happening there, and I wanted to just get rid of that. To ensure both sides of the dart connect, I measured both lines and raised the line towards the top by roughly half a centimeter. Once I had my dart drawn in place, I'm just going in here to cut out the front plan, and once I cut out this side, I actually flipped my pattern to the other side and just transferred the darts and the notches and any other information that I knew I wanted to keep on the other mirrored side of my front. Now the hemline is asymmetric, which means that you can make it as high, as curvy, or as rounded as you want. I wanted the curve to go higher on one side rather than have it like high right in the middle, so it goes and lifts up one side and then it comes back and connects to the side seam. Just gone in here to add 3 notches, and because I wanted my dress to be midi, I added an additional, I would say 10 inches wide paper at the bottom, and I'm going to try and replicate the curved line I just did on top, and the distance between both curves is 6 inches. So once I use a 6-inch guide, I try to mark points or dashes, and then I connected the dashes together so I could have a curve on the top and at the bottom that was the same shape. Once I had that marked in place, I'm going in here to add a 1 centimeter hem allowance. This plan, you can keep it like this and then trace all the different pattern pieces, or you can just cut it like I'm doing here. So I'm cutting off this bottom side of the front dress that I don't want, and then I'm actually going to divide the front dress pattern into two, a wider top half and then a bottom half, because along this particular seam that I'm cutting here, I want to add a ruffle because the dress has 2 ruffles. You can even add a third one if you want. This way that I've cut it, so I would need to remember to add a seam allowance along that curve that I just cut, so that allows me to connect the top and the bottom pieces for the front of the dress. For the back dress pattern, I'm going to be working with the front as a guide because I want to maintain the side as well as the hemline. But because of the fact that it's asymmetric, you would have to mirror the pattern this way. Else when you're drawing things along the side, it will not connect and match in the way that you want it to. So once I had the pattern flipped and taped down, I'm just going in here to trace off the hemline, the side seam, but I'm actually going to change up the neckline, especially of the back of this dress. Now I'm just going in here to draw in the straight chest line like we did earlier on. And along that chest line, I'm going to be marking half of my across chest measurement of 14 inches. To ensure this is precise, I am marking the center back edge, and then I'm going to mark 7 inches on both sides of that. I know from experience that if I don't shape that back neckline, there's going to be a little bit of gaping happening there. So I'm just going to go in here to first of all draw in my back arm curve on the left and on the right hand side, transfer any notches, any other information, as well as darts on my center back edge because I want to have darts on the back as well. And then I'm going to go in here and draw in my center back line that goes right through the middle of my back dress pattern. And I'm actually going to be slashing and spreading, but rather than adding, I'm actually going to be taking away from that back neckline on top. Now to do this, I'm going to mark about 1.5 inches on both sides of my center back edge like I'm doing here, and then I'm going to connect those points kind of like to make a very big dart that takes away from my back neckline, my back waistline, but it still worked, which I was very, very thankful for. This was like a huge pattern experimentation that I just wanted to try, and I wanted to see how it would turn out, and it actually worked at this point. So once I had cut away that middle dart that I marked like so, once I cut that piece of pattern away, I actually glued back the center back edge like this. But because of the shape of this dress, once I had cut that top end away, what happened is the bottom would have a little bit added extra. I found that there was about an inch that was added along the hemline, so I just added a bit of paper there, glued down the paper with some sellotape, and then redrew the hemline on the back of my dress. So once I had those changes made, I'm just going in here to cut off any extra paper I don't need, and the pattern pieces for this dress is done. The other parts, such as the ruffle, the straps, those I plan to cut straight onto fabric because I want to have the freedom to play around with the length of my ruffle, and I don't have a lot of fabric, so I have to be very clever with cutting the rest of the dress. Alright, it's time to cut the dress. I have laid out my fabric and I'm just spreading out my patterns in such a way that it's enough for me to cut out onto the fabric. I only had 2.5 meters, so I wanted to cut it in a way that I'll have enough material to cut the remaining parts of this dress. I tried to match up the grain lines of the pattern to the grain lines of the fabric as well, so everything connects and falls in a good way. Don't forget to cut your notches, especially with garments or clothing that have a lot of parts. Notches would really make assembling everything a lot easier. Now, because on that back hemline we spread it by, I'll say like roughly 1 inch along that point, I'm actually going to slash this bottom piece by the same amount and add that extra to this bottom piece that sits on the hemline of the dress. This you can create a separate pattern for, but I just want to be economical with how much paper I'm actually using. For the ruffle pieces that go on the bottom, I'm actually going to be cutting them as circular pieces, and to do this I'm going to go ahead to measure the front and the back along those like asymmetric curved seams that we drew earlier on. Write down those measurements. Mine came up to 48.5 inches once I added them together, because I want to make a circle skirt that is that circumference. So I'm going to put in that amount into the formula for finding the radius of a circle, which is C equals to 2 pi r, where C is 48.5 and pi is a natural occurring number of 3.142. I factored that into the formula and ended up with a radius of 7.7 inches. So I know I need to cut a circular piece that has 7.7 inches as the radius. If you have seen my circle skirt tutorial, this would be something that makes a lot of sense to you, but math is something you cannot avoid in fashion, I promise you, especially when it comes to pattern cutting. So I have 2 ruffle pieces to go at the bottom. I folded my fabric in such a way that I have 2 folded edges on the top and on the right hand side, and then I'm marking that my 7.7 inch radius along the top corner like so, and my ruffle piece itself is 7 inches wide. If I had more fabric, I'd have wanted that ruffle to be around 9 or 10 inches, but my fabric was running out and I had to be very clever with how I was cutting everything. So I'm going in here to cut the hemline of my ruffle piece, and I'm going to cut the top edge. I have added an additional ½ inch along the top edge, so I have like a seam allowance to join it to the rest of the dress. And I use the same method to cut the ruffle that sits on the neckline of the dress. So factor in that measured area as the circumference of a circle, find your radius, and cut out that piece as well. Time check is 5:03, and here are all of the pieces I have cut. I have the lining pieces over there. I have the shoulder strap, the ruffle bit for the bottom, and then the ruffle pieces for the neckline. And then I have the back, I have the front. Be mindful when you cut this piece at the bottom, because it's mirrored. You need to mirror this bottom piece as well. I ended up cutting my back the wrong direction, but we're going to make it work. It is time to sew the dress together. I have gone in to mark and pin my darts away on the front and on the back of the main outer shell of this dress. This I'm going to take to my machine, sewing using a normal straight stitch. Remember to do a back stitch at the beginning and at the end to stitch away the darts around the waistline and around the bust in this case of the front. This I'm going to stitch away, give my piece a nice press, and then I'm going to go ahead and connect them along the side seams. Now I want my zip to be on one side, preferably the right side, so I can easily do it up and down. So I'm going to stitch the other side seam alone and leave one side open, so that way I have it ready for my zip to be added later on. Good morning, it's the day after and time check is 10:20, which leaves me with about 5 hours. I know we have to leave for the restaurant at 5 o'clock. I know I have to make him a cake around 11:12, so that gives me 5 hours. Thankfully I have my assistant in. She's helping me actually create the bias tape for the straps. I'll show you guys what that looks like. I just wanted to check in before I continue actually making this dress. Let's finish this up because it's coming together really nicely. That's what it looks like. I got this tool from Amazon and I have a dedicated tutorial on how to use this tool to make your own bias tape from any fabric of your choice. I have my amazing assistant Miranda helping me with that because that takes time. And she's waving with her hand. Okay, then we're gonna finish this dress. Off camera, I've gone ahead to pin and stitch away the darts on the lining as well, because I need the lining ready to finish off the neckline of this piece. Once that was all done and tucked away, I'm going to go ahead to add the zip on the open side. This I am going to just add a few pins to keep it in place before I take it to my machine and actually stitch it down. This is an invisible zip, which means I like to open the zip, and then as I am stitching very close to the zip teeth, I would unroll the zip slightly so I sew as close as possible, so I have a nice and beautiful finish. Starting from one side, I would sew from the top until the bottom, and then once I had this side stitched away, I will go to the other side and actually start from the bottom and stitch to the top. When I was done stitching both sides of the zip tape, I would then go to the bottom edge that is still open and then put those edges together, right sides facing one another, and then I'm going to sew on a 1 centimeter seam allowance from the hemline and sew as close as possible to where my zip actually stops along the side seam in this case. For the straps, we've already gone ahead to make them adjustable off camera. I have a separate tutorial showing how to make adjustable straps. They just make wearing dresses and tops a lot easier because you can make the straps really tight or high up your shoulder or really low, depending on how you're feeling. Once I had those straps stitched in place, I'm just pinning them on the front like this. I would say it's important that you put the straps underneath the ruffle. This I changed later on, but I just thought I should mention this now before I forget to say it as I'm doing this voiceover, because you want the strap to be behind the ruffle on the neckline, whereas here what I'm showing you is I pinned the straps on the front and on the back neckline, and then I'm pinning in the ruffle. After I stitched this, I realized the strap edges actually need to be above the ruffle when you're sewing it at this point. So once that is done rightly, when you have your piece turned inside out, the straps are going to be in a way that does not prevent the ruffle from falling on the neckline of your dress. Once I had my straps and ruffle piece pinned along the neckline, I'm actually going to use a lining to finish the neckline of the dress. And because we have attached the zip on the side, I just opened the zip, and with the entire neckline of my lining piece, I'm going to be joining this from one side along the arm curve, along the back neckline, around the other side of my front and connected back arm curve to the front. So with one continuous stitch, I am sewing my lining, I'm sewing my ruffle, and I'm sewing my shoulder straps. And then I'm going to sew down the zip edges, so that's how I finish the entire inside of my piece. This sounds like a lot, but I promise you, if you assemble your dress this way, it just finishes the dress really nicely. And because we've put right side of the lining with right sides of your dress, when you turn your lining inside out, you don't see any seams because the lining is going to really hide everything away nicely. So once I get to the edge on this particular side like so, I'm going to lift my footer and then stitch down the other side of the zip edge or zip seam. And once I arrive at the bottom end, I'm going to do a back stitch to secure it, and like we stitched up that open bottom edge underneath the zip, I'm going to do the same on the lining piece as well. this time on the wrong side of the seam. So once I had that bottom edge stitched away, I'm hiding all of the sins of the seam inside the lining. So I'm just going in here to turn my piece inside out to check that everything looks okay. I also went in to just trim corners so it was easier to turn the piece inside out for a nice and clean finish. And for the ruffle, I left this edge out of my seam because I wanted to have an elastic along the top. The elastic I cut roughly 2 inches shorter than the length of that ruffle, like so. And this I'm actually going to be stitching to the top edge of the ruffle piece. So the way I'm going to stitch this is I'm actually going to fold the top edge of that ruffle, and then I'm going to be sewing with a zigzag stitch, and as I'm sewing I'm pulling my elastic a little bit so it gathers in this ruffle piece that sits like an off shoulder detail on one arm of the dress. Now this is what this ruffle piece is looking like, and I'm just going to turn that to the back, and I'm going to just tack this just on the top edge like so. Before I stitch that ruffle, when I stitch the elastic in, I actually hemmed the bottom and the sides of my ruffle piece so I didn't have to think about doing that at this point. The final step of finishing up this dress is adding the hem ruffles, and this piece that we made a separate pattern for, I'm going to sew up on the side seams with right sides facing each other. This, once I stitched on a normal 1 centimeter seam allowance, I actually went ahead to overlock this because this particular side doesn't have any lining. You can decide to add lining to yours, but because of the length of the dress, I kind of felt that it wasn't necessary to add lining to this particular side. Now once I had that piece added in place, I'm going to be adding a ruffle in that seam, and I'm going to be sandwiching the ruffle between that hemline piece to the hemline of the dress. Stitching two curved seams together can be terrifying, I would admit, so I would say go at a pace that you're comfortable with. Even I went really slow because you don't want to have any gathering or puckering in places that you don't want, so I took my sweet time doing this. Honestly, at this point, I think this is when my exhaustion really started to kick in because I'd been sewing for like hours non-stop and my mind and my body was tired. At like 3:30, I decided to take a short break and then continue to finishing off the last ruffle that sits on the bottom of this dress. For this, I just grabbed the second circular piece, which I've already hemmed off camera as well, and this I'm essentially just going to be joining together with right sides facing one another. This I always like to pin before I go into sew because compared to a straight seam where you can just like match notch to notch, once is two curves that are not the same shape, you want to add some pins just to make them obey you a little bit more as you're sewing. So this I'm going to be sewing on a 1 centimeter seam allowance, and then I'm going to go back in to overlock this seam and the seam before this one just to finish everything up. Time check at this point was around 4 p.m. so I finished this just in time to get ready to head out. All done and ready to go. Time check is literally 5 o'clock. We need to leave soon, but this is the finished dress. Obsessed. I think the cool thing about this design is you can either wear it like this or pull up the strap and have it like that. I think I'll go sexy tonight and have it like this. Thankfully the dress has white in the print, so I just pulled out my white boots. Even though it's a bit bright, I think because it's spring I can get away with how everything looks. I think hubby approves, which is always cute. Well, yeah, let's head off to the restaurant. I'll add more pictures, more videos, because we're late and we need to eat like now. I went ahead to style this dress slightly differently just to show you guys how it would look if you style this with like strappy heels, but it came out so cute. I know this is definitely a piece that I would wear on holiday or in the summer when it's very warm. Taking that risk on that center back, that situation definitely paid off as well. But I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video. If you did, please give this video a thumbs up. I felt so gorgeous wearing this to the restaurant as well. Hubby was pleased too, and I felt absolutely beautiful. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up as I mentioned earlier on. Don't forget to tag me on your recreations on social media, and until next time, have a good morning, afternoon and evening wherever you are. Bye.